there'll be lots of questions, but hold them on. I'm going to request Professor Rodrigues to make this step.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Babu, Sundar, and Gopal, for asking me to be part of this discussion. I'm not a philosopher, I must say that. But yes, I am interested in this question of the social, and I want to kind of do something else here, apart from what both Sundar and Guru have done. I want to engage in this idea a little bit differently, though I know Sundar was saying that we should think of it outside discipline. I'm in agreement with that idea. But for now, I would say at least let me do this exercise through sociology. Because I think sometimes, an idea becomes intelligible if you can root it in a certain history, in a certain type of what we call existence, etc., whatever, and then talk of it through that and try to arrive at what one might call the ontology of the social, whatever, right? Before I can begin this point, I would like to say something which is, in a sense, I would say one of the points that I, at least, began thinking of this project after Babu spoke to me about it, is that I think the act of ontologizing itself is a very political act. I don't think so. One should ever stray away from this kind of what you call point, that the act by which we ontologize the world, in which we constitute the world for ourselves, is, I think, a very, very political act. We can think of it in many, many other ways, but at least let's accept this fact that it is, at the end of the day, a very political kind of what you call activity, in which one way of constituting the world might hold kind of what might be privileged over another way of understanding the world. Okay, having said that, I want to come back to something that's Sundar kind of began his talk with, that idea about the object. What is this object we call the social? And it's just my thinking that basically when you look at the various disciplines that are there in the social sciences, sociology has always had this huge problem about, what is its object? Even till today, you find it is a problem. You'll find that political scientists and they're sitting here, whatever. People from economics, people from history, they all seem to know what their object is. Sociology is never kind of sure about what its object was. And this is kind of, to my mind, both its strength and, in a sense, a major weakness of this discipline. So, to say, for example, that we study the social, right? And it's a very easy way to frame that point. But I do think that, that is in one way saying nothing, and in one way it is saying everything. It's always kind of, mitigating these two types of what you call realities, in which, in one way, we try to say that sociology's object is the social, and at another level, we try to then constitute the social in ways and means that are deeply, deeply problematic. Okay. A second point I want to say here is that sociology's journey in terms of constituting the social, whether we look at it in the context of the founders of the discipline and what they did, or we look at it in terms of what is happening in India and what we are doing here, whatever, I don't think so in either case it is possible to kind of work with an idea that any one group or any one, institution or any one set of theory has been able to fruitfully, map out what one might call what constitutes the social. That remains a project constantly in the process of becoming. We have not achieved it. I don't think so even the West has achieved it, so there is no need for us to think that anyone is better than us, whatever, in that sense, whatever. That is, the social remains a question that across the world everybody is kind of thinking about, sometimes in very urgently, but kind of most often a point in which we kind of see ourselves being disadvantaged, marginalized, etc. in that construction, whatever. Now, in the context of sociology and the construction of the social there, I want to draw your attention to two sets of things. One is a point borrowed from the history of the discipline, the other is from my own thing, whatever, which is that one of the things we have seen in sociology as a constant kind of engagement is this act of crisis that they seem to get into. I mean, I have never seen any other discipline go through so much catharsis and crisis as sociology. I mean, you just have to meet a group of sociologists, whatever, and within 10 minutes they're talking about a crisis, whatever. Get it? No, I'm not joking. You go to any sociology conference, like you'll see this, like, in 10 minutes the guys are talking about some sort of what you call crisis, whatever. And I have often wondered why it is. And there are kind of excellent works that have been written on this issue, from Guldner to a whole range of others, whatever, who have spoken about that crisis, etc., whatever. But I do think that one of the reasons why this sense of crisis is there is because in many ways, right, sociologists and the way they constitute the social, right, has always been a project that has involved them. So in the sense of their own subjectivities becoming part of this project, it becomes also a very moral project. Constituting the social is at the same time a very moral project. And so there is this constant reference to oneself, right? What many sociologists would call, or what in another language you'd use the term self-reflexivity. There's this constant attempt to self-reflect. And that act of self-reflection, in one way or another, is constantly opening up this door of crisis. That we are not there, we never can get there. And there are all ways in which, like, you can kind of take this issue up to show how at different levels this crisis becomes kind of tenable. So that's one sense of the social that is there that I want to kind of place in front of you. The other sense of the social that I want to place in front of you is my own life. I have been a teacher of sociology for the past kind of 27 years. And in these 27 years, I've taught students in various backgrounds, huge diverse backgrounds, whatever, right? And I would say one thing as a teacher, that this has always been a problem with me when I enter the classroom. That how do I construct the social for these students? Always. Right? And you constantly realize that this act of constructing the social, right, is not only an act in which you want to bring them into your world of experience, right? So that's one moment of the social, all right? If you see what. But you also are doing something else, which is that you want to kind of transmit to them an understanding of the social with the idea that the social has a potential for change, for betterment. So this is your own personal thing now, that you're constituting the social in terms of both the act of being able to bring them into the discourse, in other words, to bring the other into the sphere of your construction. At the same time, you're also trying to do something else. That is, you're trying to kind of, if you see what Gopal was saying, if you see, encourage them to take that step to walk out, which is a moral act. Now, doing this over kind of, what's called, many years, whatever, right, has led me to kind of, come to certain types of understandings about the social and how in sociology we go about it. I can only speak from this frame. I'm sorry if I'm going to make now some kind of broad points about what I think needs to be looked at, okay? Because I think it is one thing to kind of understand ontology in the way that Sundar has put it, and I'm absolutely in no dispute there. But I think from there we need to now move into the domain about how has the social been constituted. Because that's where I think we come into the domain of a critical ontology. Right? An ontology that opens up the sphere of a critique. See, and I think that if I can use sociology as a way to kind of, open up this critique, whatever, of the social, whatever, I would like to say make certain observations here. And I mean, I'm kind of in the very moment of making them, I'm also deeply aware that that they might not be acceptable to many, etc. But I'm still going to make them despite that, whatever, right? Which is, let's look at some of the categories within which this discourse of sociology and the social has been constituted in India, right? I'm leaving the West out, or rather kind of, the kind of the European world in which kind of, the social has been. This thing, we can take that up for questions later on. But to kind of look at the kind of Indian context, how has sociology constituted the world or the social from the standpoint of Indian sociology? Okay, let me just look at it in terms of categories, because I think that's a better way to kind of look at this argument. Let's look at the category of time. How does time get represented within Indian sociology? In other words, how does Indian sociology constitute time at the level of the social, right? I would kind of humbly submit here that my knowledge of Indian sociology and what I have engaged with Indian sociologists, I think time here has a reverse sense. We are always looking backwards. Our sense of time in the construction of the social is a sense of time in which we are constantly looking backwards, right? And so as a result, when you think about it, okay, we lack the ability to think of a forward, perception of time, right? That we can take up for discussion later on, whatever. But I'm just saying that this backward understanding of time has kind of huge problems for the way in which we constitute the social level, you see. So the social, for example, in the way that like certain scholars would point out, whatever, comes to get constituted perpetually on the ground of tradition, right? We are not able to think of a world outside that. Not that it's not possible, but we never do it. Why we don't do it? Because in the way that we understand and cognize the world, in the way that we constitute the social always exists in that reverse kind of, what called reverse time that we talk about. Okay, so that's one. Okay, how do we represent the social, right, within sociology? I would say that in large measure, right, when you think about it, right, keeping very kind of with extremely few kind of what you call exceptions, the vast majority of our kind of representations that we do, in a sense, are representations that seem to kind of be trapped in a kind of a tension, right? A tension that basically is, on the one hand, right, we are claiming that our representation belongs to the present, right? But in the very act of claiming that, there is an act of denial. There's an act of disavowal that is happening, right? And that act of denial is one in which basically what we are doing is that we are constantly involved in kind of what we call, wrapping up, say dressing the present with a language that is deeply problematic, deeply problematic. So in a way then, what is happening if you look at it, and you can kind of, we are not going to kind of take out names here, whatever, but if you look at the vast variety of kind of readings that might exist in sociology, I would kind of, venture to say that like a large number of them exist in the constitutive world of the social. They exist in the domain of the pre-modern, right? But they're attempting to articulate the world of the modern. But this is a huge problem. I can tell you, even as a teacher, I've encountered this problem. That how do you teach in a class a discourse on modernity, a kind of categories that belong to the world of modernity, and yet, the experience of your subject, the experience of you yourself, is one that is tied up with something that is out there in the form of pre-modern. And how do we negotiate this? See, how do we negotiate this? Right? One way I feel, and I'm just going to make this point here and then move on to the next one. One way I feel that what we have done in the academia is that we have sought to negotiate this from Fulle's time onwards till today. We have sought to negotiate this through an act of instrumentalism. There is a way in which we instrumentalize knowledge, we instrumentalize kind of what, the world, to ensure that certain means and ends are achieved as far as our projects of whatever intellectual engagement is concerned. And this instrumentalism that is there, I think is kind of something that becomes part of this entire ontological, project that we are talking about. Next point. How do we look at groups? I mean, where do we kind of, how does sociology understand groups? Right? In general, you find that like the vast amount of sociological writing that is there, right, has generally kind of looked at groups in terms of trying to understand how certain type of constructions which are deemed as being inevitable, deemed as being necessary, how those are maintained, reproduced, etc., etc. You get it? So if you go right back to the 1960s and 70s when this discussion was first emerging, whatever, you'll find that without fail, every discourse on group was seen as a discourse of adaptation. That groups adapt. We have this adaptive capacity. We have this amazing ability to adapt. So in terms of our social relations, etc., we have this ability to adapt, and we have this ability to reproduce and to reinvent our kind of group in different ways, etc., whatever. So in many ways, if you look at it, like the discourse of groups, the discourse of the social constituted on the ground of groups remained a discourse of caste, always, right? And sociologists were constantly caught up in this question about, is caste changing or is it not changing? Right? And the point is that, often the answer would be, yes, it is changing, but it is still there. Right? What this it is, in the way Sundar pointed out, we are not ready to kind of point it out. But the fact is that we do know that in certain ways, right, the ontology that we talk about when we talk about the category of caste would definitely involve certain kind of conceptions and thinking that belong to discourses of humiliation, discrimination, etc., etc., etc. Right. Now, if we keep this type of a construction of the social, where the group and group mind is always kind of perceived as at this level of my group, and my group is my caste group, etc. My association is my groups of caste who are formed at the level of associations, etc., whatever, right? What we are actually again doing is we are going back there to that world of tradition and trying to kind of reconstitute the world there at the level of tradition, right? And finally, at the level of the person, the individual, how has Indian sociology constructed the individual? Right, the category of the individual. What can we say about this particular person, the individual, right? Here I would like to just mention some names so that you can kind of have an understanding about what I'm trying to talk about. If you take, for example, Sudhir Kakkar's work, and looking at Kakkar in terms of how he talks about that kind of growing up process of childhood, right? You look at Milton Singer's work, where he's looking at kind of individual Brahmins of Tamil Nadu and how they operate, whatever, right? And like that, there are other works, whatever, right? But just to kind of point out to both these and kind of, foreground a point about this social here, whatever, is that our individual, in kind of Indian sociology, the individual that we talk about, is an individual who is kind of, whose personality is in many ways kind of a pathological personality. Pathology. In the Durkheimian sense, it would be termed as pathology. Right? Why pathology? Because this is an individual who is unable to assert, who is unable to kind of project himself or herself in the sense of that like I. Right? That I is a deeply problematic I. Why? At one level, if you think about it, if you take, what Kakar's work, whatever, as a point, and there are many others you can use, but if you look at this point, whatever, right, each of us in our society, in this country, we are socialized at two different levels. I mean, right? There is what you would call a primary socialization, which is part of that group, the caste group, right, of which we often have no control over, no way, we are just socialized into that. And then we are socialized into another group, a larger group, that is called India, where you learn in school, all Indians are my brothers and sisters, etc., etc. But the fact of the matter is that your primary socialization is that of exclusion, is rooted on the ground of exclusion. Your secondary socialization is attempting to redress this exclusion by trying to make it inclusion, to make it inclusive. There are all sorts of problems that arise here. Some of them we know from kind of looking at communal violence, caste violence, what happens, whatever. How the primary category takes over the secondary category in such situations. Okay. The other thing that we need to look about this personality thing, etc., is the point that people like Milton Singer and several others have been making, whatever. That is the ability of this individual, of this personality, to behave in an instrumental way. So when it suits me, I'm a completely modern manager, whatever, right? When it suits me, I go back to my tradition and I'm deeply casteist. I can hold both these faces together. I can hold both these masks together and I can kind of be part of Indian society. So I've taken you to three categories like this. We can do more of this if you wish, whatever. But I was just thinking like, do I have 2-3 minutes more? Huh? 2 minutes, okay. So if we take this discussion that way, in the line that we're talking about, right? And to come to Sundar's initial argument, initial point, what is the way in which we engage with this process of the social? What does it mean to be doing an ontology of the social? I think the act of ontologizing, right, is an act that is constitutive of self and other. I don't think so it is possible for me as a person, as a subject, as an individual to constitute the social minus cognition and understanding of the fact that there is the other. Right? And it is in relationship to the other that I constitute the social. Okay. This is a very, very problematic thing. Very, very problematic thing. I'll kind of add one last point here before I close, which is that it might be, and I can tell you this is a fact, okay? It might be that Dalits want to take that one step out and walk out into a free world. Right? The fact of the matter is that even if they did take that one step out, would the upper caste recognize it? Would they accept it? That's the question. That in the constitution of the social, you need them. They have to be part of this project. Point is, how do we make them part of this project? How do they become part of this project of constituting a social that is emancipatory, that kind of looks outward, that belongs to this multitudinous sense that that Gopal was talking about? How? Right? I think Ambedkar had an answer to this question, in which he actually was trying to say that perhaps another ground on which the social could be constituted was the ground of what he called Navayana Buddhism. A ground in which upper caste and lower caste and everybody could be part of a discourse that belongs to the sense of the multitude, the sense of which everybody works with a sense of dignity, etc., etc., etc. All the values that he spoke about, right? The fact of the matter is that Navayana Buddhism and the case of those kind of 8 lakh Dalits who got converted to Buddhism on that particular day, right? Those Dalits became another caste. That's the most ironic part. That they ended up not because they wanted to, but because the others saw to it that they will constitute another caste. So this is my kind of submission to you that this constitution of the social, what ontology kind of, what you call, does, how do you include the other in this act? How do you bring the other into this act in a way that the social truly becomes an emancipatory project? Thank you.